Oh, here we go. It says we're not live yet. Here we go. Hello everyone and welcome to our latest live stream. I'm going to go ahead and pass off the control for our live stream camera here to our lovely assistant. There we go, and welcome to our latest episode here. I would like to start this out by saying if you are interested in Alex on Auto stickers, there are still tons of those available. They look like this right here, and here's how you do it. You put a self-addressed stamped envelope like this, put your own stamp on it, address it back to yourself, stick that in an envelope, and send it to us to the address that will be down there in the description section of the video here very shortly. And then we will send you a sticker or two. So that is totally free. You just pay for postage. That's how that works. Next up, we are going to have giveaways at the end of April, and we are collecting random things to give away to you. So this is what we have so far. We have a Citation 1 with Google Assistant. That is going to be available and up for grabs. We have some things from Mazda here. This is a Mazda Thermos, so thanks to Mazda for sending along a few things to give away. And a unknown little box here. What is this? This is interesting because I haven't seen some of these either. What is the little box? If you manage to get it open, this is a keychain. So a Mazda keychain and then a Mazda hat. So we have those lovely things right there. Then we have Jeep hats over here. Two of those. And then, yep, guess you noticed the Rivian picture that has shown up lately. So maybe we'll give one of those away if anybody is interested. So moving along to our topics of the day here. First up, we have the Jeep Gladiator. That video is coming out this evening, so if you are watching this now, be sure and set your alarm clock for 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern Time, and that review will go live at that point. I was really surprised in the Gladiator. It's just as off-roady as you might expect. We can't talk about it too much, of course, until the embargo lifts, but we could talk about some of the details, the production details, rather than how it drives. So, interestingly enough, the Gladiator isn't just a Wrangler that they sawed the back of off and stuck a pickup truck bed on the back. Although, honestly, I probably would have been happy if they had just done that. That would have been fine for me. Instead, what they did was they took a Wrangler Unlimited and some pieces from the Ram 1500 pickup truck. They jammed them in a blender and then poured out the Gladiator. So the Gladiator, it turns out, actually shares some suspension components directly from the Ram 1500, which was a bit of a surprise. They said that the reason for that was that the Gladiator's donor car, the Wrangler, the suspension for that vehicle didn't work quite right for heavier payloads and heavier towing ability, so they had to borrow things from the Ram pickup line. So the doors are shared, the windshield's shared, some of the front fender components are common, and the hood is the same. But other than that, actually, a lot of the structure of the vehicle is very, very different. The body's different, the frame's different, and the suspension design is actually quite different as well. So that's kind of an interesting little thing. Don't expect it to be cheap. I can't talk about pricing until 9 p.m. tonight, but take a look at where the Wrangler Unlimited is. Know that it is probably going to be more than that, as we have all suspected. None of that is news. And then take a look at where the Tacoma and the Colorado start, and you can get an idea of where the Gladiator is headed. So, moving right along to questions here for a bit. What would I recommend for a first car at about $10,000? So, shout out to Caleb there. Nothing sporty, probably something more comfortable. I would say if you're looking for a first car, depending on your situation, I might recommend something that you could get that's almost new or as new as possible. So you're pretty much going to be in the compact and subcompact range. There are a lot of subcompact cars that are going to be great value. Something like a Nissan Versa, if you could get it new, and you might actually be able to at around that price range with the manual transmission, I think would make a great car. Manual transmissions are fun. I wouldn't buy one now at my age, but I would definitely recommend a new driver buy one. They're fun to learn on. I love driving manual transmissions. I'm just not sure if I want to drive one every day now. but my last few cars, and some of my very first cars were manuals, and I loved them at that point and would never have switched for anything in the world. And something like a Nissan Versa can be cheap. It's relatively comfortable. It's fun. Is it the best car in the world? No, but it's very practical, reliable, and low cost to operate would be the key things there. So I would say look at something along those lines. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more used, then you could probably get your hands on something like a Toyota Corolla or something along the lines of a Honda Civic, but they're going to have a lot more wear on them than a newer model subcompact would have. Moving along here, thoughts on Puzo returning to the North American market. I'm not sure about Puzo, but I really wish Citroën would show up back here because I do like a lot of Citroën's cars. I think that a lot of what Puzo has to offer isn't quite French funky enough for me. And if you are familiar with French cars, then you'll know that some of the Citroën designs are really out there. And in my head, one of the big reasons for the French to come back to the American market would be for some of those more interesting, very French designs to come back. So if they're just going to be an imitation of some other European car, I wouldn't be interested. But if it was going to be truly funky, then I actually would be really interested to see what those would be like. Moving along here, thoughts on the new Mazda RX-9? Not yet, but we'll see, if it ever actually shows up. Any idea when the Hyundai Palisade is supposed to be out? This is actually a really good question, Mark. So, the Palisade, I'm actually surprised, is actually going to be several months behind the Kia Telluride. So the Telluride started actually sales early March, so several weeks ago. Actually, it was on sale and available in dealers in good quantities before we actually were able to drive it. I'm not sure why that happened that way. That's just the way that it worked. The Palisade, on the other hand, its drive event is not going to be till June. And we're told not to expect good dealer stock until around the end of that particular month. So it's going to be a good 4 to 5 months behind the Telluride, which is surprising. How similar is it to the Telluride? The best way to describe the relationship between Hyundai and Kia is that it is far, far more than the relationship between Nissan and Mitsubishi at the moment, but less directly than the relationship between Chevrolet and Buick at the moment. Hyundai essentially controls Kia, does not necessarily own the majority of Kia, but Hyundai essentially controls Kia, the parent company. R&D is very centralized, so perhaps the best way to look at this is as 3 entities. There's a common entity that researches and develops common platforms, suspension designs, engines, transmissions, safety systems, software, that sort of thing. There's one group that does that. And then the Kia side and the Hyundai side get to access this communal parts bin, pull from it, and design products on their own. So ultimately, the products are related to one another, but what order they happen in tends to be somewhat random. And one division may not always have what the other is because of their particular priorities. And there are a very, very select few people in the global organization that actually get to see what's going on at both companies at the same time. So Peter Schreier, for instance, their new designer who came from the BMW M division, and some of his group is able to see what happens at both Kia and Hyundai. But aside from that, they actually can't see each other. So the designers that are working on Hyundais, the designers that are working on Kias, they have no idea what's going on the other side. And in the United States, the two companies are absolutely 100% separate. No employees are shared, nothing financially is shared. The PR companies are totally different. Even the advertising agencies are different between those two companies. Absolutely, totally separate. Very, very odd because there's not really a synergy financially in having them separate, but they somehow like this arrangement. So that is critical to understanding the differences between Hyundai and Kia products. So the Kia Sorento, for instance, is theoretically related to the Santa Fe and the Santa Fe XL and the new Santa Fe, but it is neither one nor the other, but it is related under there somewhere. The Forte and the Elantra are related, but at the moment the Forte is the newer one in this group, even though the Elantra just got refreshed, it didn't get completely redesigned. At this exact moment, the Optima is the latest midsize sedan, but soon it will be the Sonata because it's getting redesigned before the Optima gets redesigned. The Ioniq and the Nero came out at around the same time, and they're related even though they look very different. The Kona and the Soul are related, not the Kona and the Nero, so that's actually a different level of thing. So that's kind of how they interact with one another. Now back to Palisade and Telluride. So they will share the same engine, the same transmission. They will share the same safety systems and the same key safety system designs. So whichever one's crash test scores come out first, you can apply those to the other because logically they should be identical. The crash structures are communally designed. But the sheet metal is totally different. So they share no metal. They generally share no plastic other than buttons. So buttons and switches, the core component may be identical, but they may have different finishes, different plastic touches on the outside. The button banks in the dashboard are generally styled differently, but underneath the covers they're the same. The software is differently styled, but the software is generally the same. The big difference between Palisade and Telluride at the moment appears to be that the Telluride was designed in a very square and boxy format, and that's resulted in better cargo room and better third row room than the Palisade. On the flip side, the Palisade's interior, I think, actually looks more premium than what we find in the Telluride. I like the overall styling, but I also like the way that Hyundai has chosen to do their trim levels. So on the Palisade, it appears, at any rate, from what we've seen at the auto shows, that the Palisade will likely be available with more premium touches and finishes on the inside, but sort of the skeleton of the product is shared, if that makes sense. So moving along here. When do we think the MX-5 Miata will be refreshed? I think it's going to be quite some time. The MX-5 does not sell well, and really the only reason the MX-5 exists is because Fiat was able to chip in some cash for the 124 Spider. And as we've seen with previous generations of the MX-5 and other vehicles that don't sell terribly well, they have a really long shelf life. So there's nothing objectively wrong with the MX-5. So I think that Mazda is not going to be inspired to make any changes that are going to cost them money and won't increase sales. So when sales start to taper off, drastically on the MX-5, that's when we might see a refresh, but don't expect it to be a huge change. And expect the next change in the MX-5 to be relatively minor. They may change the nose, they may do a few interior tweaks, but the substance is going to remain the same. What's my thought on Pilot versus Telluride versus CX-9? CX-9 is an interesting option here, is my favorite. The CX-9 is gorgeous, but it's not the most practical entry in this segment. So the best way to look at the CX-9 is in the same category as Highlander and Pilot and CX-9 and Acadia together. Those all have very similar kinds of interior room, and Sorento is in that group as well. And then we have sort of a middle ground where we have entries like the Explorer, to some extent, although the Explorer does have a large cargo area. It's sort of in this middle road where we have Explorer, we have Atlas, we have Pathfinder. You're going to find more combined legroom and more comfortable third row seats in this group. And then we have the big entries in this segment where Palisade, Telluride, and to some extent Atlas and Explorer play, Chevy Traverse as well. These are much, much bigger. So the Telluride and the Palisade have about 7 inches more legroom overall than a CX-9. It's an absolutely massive difference in overall combined legroom. And actually, I might be getting that number wrong, but I can look it up here very easily here, just so you all know the correct number. But the Telluride also has a huge cargo area. It's actually bigger than just about everybody but the Traverse. And the Palisade is a little bit smaller, but it's not a huge delta. So looking at my handy cheat sheet here with combined legroom figures, the Palisade, just for reference here, has 117.9 inches of legroom, 1, 2, and 3 put together. A Honda Pilot has 111, so 7 inches more legroom in that vehicle than the Pilot. CX-9 actually has less legroom than Pilot, so the difference there is actually 8 inches. It actually has 8 inches more legroom than a CX-9. It's a huge delta. Palisade's cargo area is a little bit closer to the average in that segment at 18 cubic feet. Telluride, because of the square rear end, is at 21 cubic feet. So that's kind of how they stack up there. And that's the best way to really think of them, is looking not necessarily just at the overall exterior size, but the interior size. And Palisade and Telluride are very well packaged, meaning that you get a lot of room inside for how big they are outside, if that helps. When will RAV4 Hybrid be hitting sales floors? I'm actually told that they're on sale now. I believe that was a this week thing. So be sure and check with your dealer and see if you can get them. It is possible finally to order a RAV4 Hybrid. We're in the process again of getting a RAV4 ourselves here at Alex and Autos to do a video review series on. And the RAV4 Hybrid was finally available as an option to actually order. So you should be able to get that now. Let's see here. Moving right along. Let's see here. Pardon me, the YouTube widget here is not very helpful in actually getting through the chat section. Would staggered tires develop improve handling similar to some rear-wheel drive luxury cars? Staggered tires up front. That's an interesting point. So front-wheel drive cars generally have symmetrical tire layouts, and rear-wheel drive cars can sometimes have staggered setups where the rear tires are wider than the fronts. There are a very select few front-wheel drive cars that do this. In the opposite direction, where the wider tires are up front and then the staggered setup is narrower at the back. Namely, the Spark EV is the first one that comes to mind, the General Motors Spark EV. They did that because the amount of torque that vehicle was able to deliver really needed some extra help up front. Now, logically, yes, this could actually improve overall handling, but in a slightly different way than rear-wheel drive cars. Rear-wheel drive luxury cars will sometimes do this to help apply power in the rear, because the rear end is going to be a little bit lighter, and even though weight transfers to the rear, which will help balance this out, you could still have some traction concerns back there, so you'll put the wider tires in the back to help apply the grip. Same thing could be applied to a front-wheel drive car, actually, but you'd have to do it carefully and balance with the other systems in the vehicle. But theoretically, wider tires up front could compensate for the heavy weight balance that we find up front. The general reason that we don't see that is efficiency, for one. The wider the tire, the lower your efficiency is going to be. And then overall packaging is a problem. So if you put wide tires up front, then you may have to adjust your bump stops because your tires may rub. You may also end up with less desirable overall handling feel because the tires are bigger, so it's going to take more effort to steer. You may get less steering feedback because of the things compensating for that. So that's generally why we don't seem to see it. Front-wheel drive cars generally are in a different price and maintenance category. So luxury car shoppers don't mind having different tire sizes. They don't mind the fact that they may not wear evenly because you can't do a cross rotation on them. They're just rotating side to side. And you know, all of that together just means that we don't really see very many vehicles out there that come that way from the factory. You could do it yourself aftermarket and maybe have a slight performance improvement in terms of overall handling, but it would require some extra work on your side to make sure that everything was sorted. Let's see here. How'd I like the Nexo? I actually really liked the Nexo a great deal here. The Nexo is an interesting little thing because it really is just an electric vehicle that has a different kind of battery in it. It happens to be powered by hydrogen. And that works out well for me here where I am located. My office in San Jose happens to be very close to the only hydrogen station in San Jose. And remember, just for reference, San Jose is the 10th largest city in the country, and we have one hydrogen station. The San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland Metro Bay Area is one of the largest metro areas in the country. There aren't really that many hydrogen stations here. From my office, there's the one in San Jose, and then there's one about 10 miles away up north. There's another one about 10 miles away down south. And then there are some planned around here. There are more hydrogen stations in the Los Angeles metro area than there are here, and they're actually a little bit more densely packed. But if you live outside a very specific window, it's not going to be a great option. That aside, though, I was really impressed. Hyundai has really done a good job at packaging the fuel cell. So the fuel cell stack now lives entirely under the hood. It's not under the front seats, partially like we see in the Mirai. The fuel tanks, they've gone the more expensive route and given us several small tanks, so that way they can be more effectively located underneath the vehicle. So the cargo area is actually quite large. It's double what we see in the Honda Clarity. And the interior is really nicely done too. I kind of had expected Hyundai in a theoretical world to just give us another one of their crossovers that had been hydrogenized or hydrogenated, however you want to say that. But they didn't just take a Santa Fe and stick a hybrid or a hybrid hydrogen system under the hood. They actually built almost a new vehicle, which is surprising. Now, if you haven't heard the news, this may be logical because in Korea, there's a huge push for hydrogen. They're trying to make 500,000 hydrogen vehicles available in Korea by 2030. And over the next, I believe it is 2.5 to 3 years, they want 50,000 hydrogen fuel cell units in the passenger market there as well. So there's definitely all of a sudden, huge push towards hydrogen from the Hyundai Motor Group. And I find it really interesting. We'll see if the stations come. It's practical for some areas, but not necessarily others. So moving along here. Let's see here. When do we think they'll refresh the 370Z? We haven't heard any details on that, so probably not for at least another year, because it's generally we won't see too many rumors out, for a year. Sammy's asking for a shout out, so hi Sammy. Any news on the 2020 Genesis G80 Sport? Sadly, no. Genesis still has some dealer issues that they're working through, and until we see all those dealer entries working through, I'm not sure exactly what we will see there. Let's see here. What are our thoughts on comparing Telluride versus Ascent? I think that, again, that has to do with the overall size inside. So you'll find that the Ascent is not small on the outside, but in terms of overall actual interior room, the Ascent actually ends up being around 6 inches less overall legroom on the inside, and notably less cargo room as well. So that's going to be the big difference there. The Ascent really is more Pilot and Highlander sized on the inside, whereas the Telluride and the Chevy Traverse and the Palisade are almost in a category on their own because of their interior dimensions. Moving along here, between Subaru Forester and RAV4 Hybrid Limited, which one would you choose? That is a tricky one. I would probably get the RAV4 Hybrid because of its overall fuel economy and the overall reliability that we see in Toyota's hybrid systems. My one complaint about the Forester Touring is that once you get up into the Touring's price range, and actually this applies to the RAV4 Limited as well, I think they're just more premium feeling options out there. For instance, I think that the Mazda CX-5's interior is just a step above what we see in the Subaru or the Toyota, and that would be my main reason to go for something else other than those two top-end trims. The Forester is an excellent value in base trim, but as you work your way on up the ladder, the interior just doesn't have that same premium feel that we see in some of those other alternatives there. Why has BMW's EV program gone nowhere? We were early to the game with i8 and i3, but nothing after that. I think that BMW's big stumble with i3 and i8 was their carbon fiber intense construction. You'll notice that the i3 and i8 aren't built like any other BMW out there. And ultimately, it appears that BMW just couldn't get the cost effectiveness of carbon fiber down where they really wanted it to be to make those work. And that's why we see BMW sort of refocusing on other more traditional construction technologies. And instead of going the pure EV route there, pushing out a lot of plug-in hybrids as we wait until those more mainstream technologies get pushed into production EVs. We definitely see this, for instance, in the Tesla lineup. Tesla is not using anything crazy as far as construction goes. The Model S, Model 3, Model X, and the upcoming Model Y all have very, very conventional construction. There's no particular reason to use carbon fiber in those vehicles because it just increases cost at this moment, and cost is something that they really can't afford to try and make EVs profitable. So moving along here, when we might see a Highlander refresh, it appears that it might be within a calendar year or so of now. So if you are looking at replacing a vehicle and you can wait at least 12 months, I would say maybe we might see a Highlander refresh available to you by then. But if you need a car soon, then I would wait, or I wouldn't wait on that, basically. Paul is saying the i3 is Model 3 is an electric car. Can't understand why we compare it to BMW and Mercedes. It's definitely not a luxury car, not with that cheap plastic dominant interior. I would say that you have not been inside some recent BMW or Mercedes products then. Remember that luxury cars are about more than just interior. So I actually think that the Model 3's interior is relatively in keeping with the low-end trims of the Mercedes and BMW competition. But pricing, brand prestige, etc., all of that plays a role in this category. And Tesla is generally regarded in the industry as a luxury brand. I actually don't think of any major industry analyst that would consider Tesla a mainstream brand at all. Their least expensive product, theoretically, now is going to be $35,000 if it ever shows up. And that is actually $5,000 more than where most of the mainstream luxury brands start with their product line. And they go up to very expensive vehicles. Tesla does not necessarily give you all the same luxury accoutrements inside that we see in some of the German options, but they trade that for the gadgets and the gizmos and the electric drivetrain performance, etc. So Tesla and the Model 3 is definitely in that luxury category there. Let's see here. 2019 Accord LX or EX, I would definitely EX. Considering a Chevy Bolt, do you think it's good as a commuter car? I would say it depends on your overall commute. And the one important thing to remember about the Chevy Bolt, with a B, is that its tax credit is sunsetting here. So if you want a Bolt, your time may actually have already run out. For the full credit, if it hasn't, and if I'm wrong on that one, then you need to hurry. If you're looking at other alternatives, know that you should be able to get your hands on a Hyundai Kona here soon for less than the Bolt because of that tax credit change. Kona EVs are really hard to find on the ground right now because of the battery shortage in South Korea. That's why we don't see the Soul EV or the Nero EV yet in the US, but both of those are coming soon, so we have a new onslaught there of EVs. Moving along here. How do we become one of those people who drive camouflaged cars for a living? You would need to become a handling and drivetrain and suspension expert for one of the car companies. Those are really the only people that get to drive those kinds of vehicles for a living. Let's see here. What do we think Infiniti and Acura need to do in order to compete with Lexus, which both outsell? I think the big problem with Infiniti and Acura in a way right now is budget. So Acura and Infiniti just don't have the budget to try and do completely separate vehicles. I think Infiniti is a little bit closer because they do have some unique platforms within the organization. The Q50, Q60, the Q70 are not shared with any other Nissan product in North America, so that really helps out those vehicles right there. The QX30 also is unique. Its platform's actually shared with Mercedes. I think more of that really should happen, and more frequent product refreshes. Acura is a difficult thing, on the other hand. Acura has always tried to be the value alternative in this segment, and the value alternative ultimately ends up having a bizarre perception by customers in a way. There are definitely some fans, and then there are a lot of detractors as well. When you look at Acura sales, Acura actually does quite well, to be perfectly honest. RDX, MDX, and TLX, and even ILX actually sell very well for their segments. The trouble with Acura is that they don't have an entry in every segment. So there's no real 5 Series competitor or 7 Series competitor. They have the RLX, which is not quite where it ought to be probably. They don't have anything in the fastest growing segment at this time, which is the subcompact crossover segment. So Acura has just sort of chosen where they want to play, and that's where they choose to play, and they do well for the most part. The only sales flop really is the RLX. They just haven't really chosen to have a full line like other manufacturers have. Let's see here. Have we seen the new 2020 Sonata? I have, and I actually really like the look. I know that that's been very divisive, but I actually like the look overall. Someone's picking up a Volvo S60 T6. What are my thoughts? I've always liked the S60. I actually owned 2 Volvos in the past, so I'm definitely okay with Volvo vehicles there. And I like the way that the S60 looks. It's one of those vehicles that is not necessarily class leading, but whenever I sit in it, it feels like I belong somehow. It actually it fits my personality and how I like vehicles to drive out on the road. You know, there are more fun vehicles out there, there are faster vehicles out there, there may be better values out there, but I think that Volvo does a good job overall being a very well-rounded product. So let's see here. Any word on a Tundra redesign? It appears to be quite far off. We don't know any details for sure yet. Someone's in the market for a $30,000 to $40,000 crossover. looking at a CX-5 or a lightly used luxury car such as a 2019 RDX or Q5. I would say in that group, I would get the 2019 RDX. I really like the RDX. If you can get a good one for about signature trim pricing, that's definitely where I would be. I would tend to avoid the Q5. The Q5's overall just was a little uninspiring for me in this particular generation. Handling is actually quite similar to the RDX. It's not really similar to the X3. So the X3 and GLC, Stelvio, Macan, etc., they all handle better than the Q5. And the Q5 also has some longer-term maintenance considerations to keep in mind. The dual-clutch transmission requires fluid changes every 40,000 miles. It's much, much sooner than you'll ever see in the RDX or the CX-5, so keep that in mind. And the RDX overall performance is quite good. Thoughts on the best 7-seater SUV? There are a lot of good options out there. I would say it really depends on your particular buying situation there. Let's see here. What happened to the Toyota Venza? I think the Venza was a product before its time. It also wasn't horribly attractive, I think, at its height. I don't think that the Venza sold badly, but as far as Toyota was concerned, it wasn't a hit. So Toyota does not like to have vehicles out there that sell in the 60,000 unit range. They love 100,000 unit cars and above. And Venza, I think, also was a car ahead of its time. The crossover craze wasn't quite running on all cylinders, so it wasn't quite the right fit at the right time. I think that can also explain the first generation Chrysler Pacifica. Let's see here. Which premium all-wheel drive crossover would you say is the best choice? Miles per gallon, lease rates, fun to drive. I would actually say the RDX there. RDX is a really good value at the moment. Recommend, let's see, Honda Clarity, popular. Yes, I agree. The Honda Clarity is pretty good. Let's see here. We'll skip along to a few questions. Sorry if I haven't answered you already. We have to try and squeeze this all in an hour-long show here. What do we think of the new Honda EV to come out later this year? We don't know whether if you're speaking of the little Honda EV, we don't think that that's going to come to the US, but we aren't sure yet. Honda likes to play things close to their chest, but maybe there will be another EV from Honda at some point here soon. They have committed to electrification, but not necessarily full EVs. Ali is saying, I'm a super commuter about 100 miles a day. Apart from fuel economy, what car truck is most comfortable for highway commute? There, I would say key things to look for would be overall front seat design. So you're going to want to be willing to pay extra for things like seat cushion extensions, four-way lumbar support, that sort of thing. For long commutes, you may want to look at some of the luxury segment vehicles if you're at all considering spending that much. Cars that might have anti-fatigue function in the seats. If you're looking for more of a mainstream vehicle that you want to do long commutes with, then actually I would say look at the Nissan product line. Their seats may not be as adjustable as some of the competition, but their seats are generally very, very comfortable and ergonomically designed. If you want to look at something that's a little bit outside the beaten path, then perhaps something like a Lincoln actually might be a good option, generally relatively comfortable. And some of the Lincoln products also include the ability to get the anti-fatigue seats, and their seats tend to be pretty adjustable. Someone's saying they'd like to a used or pre-owned MDX. You want the 9-speed transmission. You want the 9-speed. Interesting. I haven't heard that before. What are the differences beside the new bodywork? The new bodywork really is the only difference between the 2016 and 2017 MDX. They didn't change power levels. They have the same transmission. There have been some software refinements over time, but the basics of the transmission are the same. I've never been a huge fan of the way that 9-speed shifts, so personally, if I was looking at a pre-owned MDX, I would probably be more interested in the hybrid version, which gets you out of the 9-speed automatic transmission and into better fuel economy. Let's see here. So, are you worried about constant exposure to off-gassing in new cars? John Murray's asking. You know, I have thought about that before, but generally speaking, manufacturers are trying to improve that, so my chances are better now than they ever were before of not having lung cancer. Hopefully that's not really going to happen to me. I haven't thought about that too much, but hey, it's every job has risks, so hopefully that's not one of them. Let's see here. Thanks, Snarly, for the shout out there. Will the Palisade have a higher GVWR because the Telluride is just light enough not to pass the IRS 6,000 pound limit for vehicle work depreciation? I doubt it. One of the reasons that we don't see the GVWR in those vehicles is The payload figures are definitely set by the number of passengers, so 8 passengers, the tow rating, 5,000 pounds, and an appropriate tongue weight for that, and then curb weight. And curb weight is something that they're interested in actually decreasing, not increasing. So the only way you'll end up really in that 6,000 pound group is in vehicles that are not having so much of a focus on overall curb weight. And that's why we find those higher GVWRs in the more full-size SUVs and crossovers that are designed for heavier towing in the luxury segment, etc. That's generally what we see there. Let's see here. Do we know when we'll drive the 2020 Subaru Legacy? No, we don't know yet. It should be probably this summer, I believe, is what Subaru has said, but they haven't given us any specific dates. Can we expect an e-tron review soon? I hope so. I don't know when, though. What would be the best commercial passenger van? 8+ seats. I'm assuming you're talking about full-size van rather than minivan. If you're talking about minivan, I would say Pacifica. If you are talking about commercial passenger van, full-size van, then I would say the Ford is going to be the winner there at the moment. Looking to buy a used sports sedan, IS350 or Infiniti Q50, what are my thoughts? I would Q50. The Q50 is more comfortable, it's bigger. Depending on how old you get, you'll find those twin-turbo engines. The IS350 performance is not bad, and the handling dynamics are good, but the interior is a little bit cramped. I've never cared for the interior styling too much personally for my tastes, and the Infiniti twin-turbo engines definitely provide better performance than what we see in the Lexus product line there. The difference in cargo space between Telluride and Palisade, is the actual depth the same? Yes, it appears that the actual depth is relatively similar. There may be a slight change there due to the overall curvature of the back, but the ceiling is mainly what gives us the extra dimensions there. Now, you might be thinking that's useless, but remember that the ceiling starts curving in at around the glass level. So the difference between Telluride and Palisade may actually include the ability to store some of these larger roller bags here. So if I were to grab one of our infamous 24-inch roller bags right here, the Telluride's cargo area is suitable to actually stick a bag in sort of this way with the hatch here and the backs of the seats over here on this side. And you may not be able to do that with the Palisade, because when the roofline and the window starts curving in right about here, you can no longer close it on a 24-inch roller bag, and that actually could be a problem. Now, we don't know exactly how that's going to go until we see it, but that's my guess over there on that side. Guess on the availability of Skyactiv X. Mazda's been pretty cagey on this, and some folks are actually worried that the Skyactiv X may never come to the US. I don't know if I share that fear, but Mazda has definitely been cagey when talking to us about it. And they have only said that it's going to Europe within calendar year 2019, and that after that they cannot speak about future product. So my guess would be that if you're in Europe, you'll be able to buy a Skyactiv X engine in December of 2019. And then if you're in America, we may or may not see it. We just don't know yet. The question for Skyactiv X would be, are the fuel economy improvements sufficient to give it enough of a cafe bump to actually justify its existence? And we just don't know the answer to that question yet. Just ordered the new Volkswagen GLI. What do you think the gas mileage will be? It should be pretty good, actually. Volkswagen has generally done well in terms of overall fuel economy. The manual transmission obviously is going to be lower in real-world driving than the automatic, but the automatic is probably going to be right where you should be. What is my favorite car of all time? Ooh, that's an interesting question. Generally, newer is always better, but I would say favorite car of all time, probably like a early Rolls-Royce Phantom 3, something in the like late 30s body style, around there. Modern car, probably the BMW M5. Let's see here. Do we think the Mazda will ever put the 2.5T in the Mazda 3? This is an interesting question. We've talked a lot about the realities here on this channel about car design, and this is something that, again, I have to drive home. So remember that when we're talking about options and what car manufacturers put in cars, we also have to think not just on consumer demand and enthusiast demand and what I would like, what you would like, but what the car companies can actually afford to do, both in terms of R&D money and in terms of government compliance. And government compliance is a huge, huge deal, especially for a car company like Mazda that's a relatively small company and does not have very many hybrids or electric vehicles on the future that are coming up here soon. So I would say that we are not likely to see the 2.5-liter turbo in the Mazda 3 anytime soon. They've already given it a bit of a mileage hit by adding all-wheel drive to it, and that was to try and help increase sales in the New England states and north of the Mason-Dixon line. But we are probably not going to see a turbo there because that would drop their overall corporate average fuel economy scores. Corporate average fuel economy is a big deal for car companies because it will result in big fines if they don't meet a certain minimum corporate average fuel economy score. Now, CAFE, which is what this is called, is a huge driver in what we're seeing out there, the push towards electrification, the push towards hybridization, the push towards diesels actually is part of CAFE compliance as well, because that helps bump up your scores. And the important critical thing to remember about CAFE testing is that CAFE numbers are not based on the window sticker that you're seeing at the dealer. That would be too easy. So CAFE compliance scores are based on the older EPA cycle that does not use the higher speed driving cycles. It does not use the air conditioning on like we'd seen in other, the more recent CAFE tests. So technologies like start-stop and mild hybridization have a huge impact on CAFE, even though they may not have as big of an impact on your daily driving cycle as a full hybrid system or a full EV system or a plug-in hybrid system. But in terms of the CAFE number, it has a huge, huge impact. Same thing goes for plug-in hybrids. So when we're looking at product planning decisions, CAFE's next compliance window in 2025 is coming up soon. So anything new like the Mazda 3 has to be designed with that CAFE compliance immediately in mind. And adding a turbocharged engine would definitely drop the Mazda 3 out of compliance for its overall size. Mazda, we don't know exactly what they're going to be doing coming up, but it could be that in order to complete that compliance, we may actually see the disappearance of some higher performance and turbocharged models. This is also seemingly why Mazda has said that there will be no Mazda Speed model coming up anytime soon either, because that would result in lower fuel economy. Now, they may change their mind. Mazda Speed could come back as a performance hybrid variant, something along those lines. We just don't know quite yet. But that's also some of the reasons behind other changes. That's why we don't find any small pickup trucks in America, because that would put them in a CAFE compliance window where it just wouldn't function. They wouldn't be able to meet that compliance. But by stretching them out to the size of the Tacoma and the Gladiator and the Colorado, all of a sudden CAFE compliance is a lot easier. That's also likely why we see this big EV push from Hyundai and Kia lately, because those EVs are really going to help them out not just in ZEV compliance in California, but nationwide for the CAFE compliance figures. So moving along here, what do we think of Consumer Reports reliability scores? This is a tricky one. Generally hate to talk about other outlets in such specific ways, but the one thing that I will say about Consumer Reports reliability scores is that anytime you're asking for a specific group of people for input, you are at the mercy of what that pool looks like. So this goes as much for consumer forums where they collect people that have problems, and for Consumer Reports, which definitely seems to collect readers and viewers that care about reliability. If reliability is not a huge concern to you, why would you answer one of these surveys? One of the other things that I've found fault with some of these reliability metrics out there is that they will ask the consumer how they feel, how important they feel the problem is, which is interesting. But then if you're using that as a metric, as far as saying serious problems versus not serious problems, then what may be a serious problem to me may not be a serious problem to you, and vice versa. In addition to that, I just think that some of their metrics are a little bit misplaced. I'll leave it at that. But generally speaking, it's still valid information. It's still a method of comparing one car to another, and I don't think there's anything wrong with their metrics when it comes to reliability. So when you're looking at Consumer Reports and they say Toyota, Honda, Kia, Hyundai, etc., are at the top of the pack in terms of overall reliability, and certain brands like Jaguar, Land Rover, Ram, Dodge, etc., are towards the bottom in terms of reliability. That is generally accepted as the case. I mean, I don't think that there is anybody out there that will say that's not true. I would quibble over the minutia in here. How bad is this? What is the delta between good and bad reliability? And how much of this is subjective and how much is objective? And we don't actually know that within their numbers. That is the cause of my complaint there, I guess. You know, if your infotainment software is crashing, is that unreliability, or is that an annoyance? Where does this fall in that window? And that's something that we just can't extrapolate from their numbers. You know, we do look at the numbers from outlets like True Delta, which gives us a little bit more insight into these numbers. And then we can say that the incidence of mechanical problems is not a huge difference in early ownership experiences between the top and bottom of these cars. So your Toyota and your Dodge may have different problems. The Dodge may have more problems overall, but they're not going to be that traditional reliability problem of, will the car get me to work? It will be things like the software crashed, or a body panel is not fitting right, or there's a squeak or something along those lines, but it's still going to get you to where you want to go. So hopefully that made sense there. I feel like the Honda Passport is disappointing off-road. I would say it depends on what you're looking at. They wanted to make a very off-road capable vehicle in that segment, and it is definitely more off-road capable than an Edge, than a Murano, than a Santa Fe, etc. But it is not at the same level as a Grand Cherokee. So if you want to actually take your crossover in that segment off-road, the Grand Cherokee is really going to be where you want to be. But if you want the safety and the security of knowing that you can go off some of those gravel roads as long as you choose your line appropriately and take a spare tire with you, then you can do it. Then the Passport actually does a good job there. Let's see here. Audi e-tron SUV review in the pipeline. I hope so, but we don't have any details here just yet. Why is the Elantra GTN not offered in the USA if it's sold in Canada? I would assume it's coming here eventually. We just don't know when. When we review the CT6, we actually have a CT6, CT6V. We don't know on that one. I'm assuming that Cadillac is going to allow us to review it. They may or may not put it in the fleet. If it's here, we will definitely review it because I'm really interested in it. I'm actually really excited about that one. But if it doesn't ever show up, we won't be able to review it. Hellcat versus M5 versus E63S. Oh, M5 every time. What is your opinion on the BMW i3? It's quirky, it's funky. It actually leases really well. So if you're looking at getting a funky BMW, it's really cool. I've always liked the concept of its range extender. Ultimately, it ends up being strangely inefficient, but I like the concept. So I always thought that was kind of cool. Let's see here. What is my opinion on the Spectrum leasing program they announced? It is very similar to what we see from Volvo. So it's going to be an interesting alternative to a traditional lease, but think of it really as a lease because that's what it really is. Oscar is asking, what advice can you give to a new YouTuber like myself? Happy car reviews. I would just say, stay true to yourself. Do you, and if that's what YouTube likes, then that will work. I've never believed in reinventing anything or bowing to what seems outside my box. I like my box. I like where it is. I like how it's shaped. I like how I'm in the box. Thinking outside the box isn't my thing. What do we think about the Kia Sorento having much better seats and lumbar support than the Telluride? I was honestly disappointed about that, actually. Lacking passenger lumbar, correct, and as I pointed out in our review, lacking the four-way lumbar support that we find in the Sorento. I believe their main goal there was to try and keep the Telluride from being too expensive, because they've discovered that selling a $60,000 Kia is a problem. So I was actually really surprised that the Telluride's price window is so narrow. When you really look at it, you can get a Highlander, a Pilot, an Atlas, an Explorer goes way over it. All these get more expensive than a Telluride. I think the only option in that segment that is less expensive than the Kia is the Pathfinder, and it's ancient. So I think that was really their target in trying to keep that price range very narrow. I would assume that if the Telluride really explodes in sales, and if those top-end trims are selling well, then Kia might consent to adding some of those options back onto the Telluride. But I would suspect that it's just based on the overall sales picture there that we see. Let's see here. What is the best bumper-to-bumper warranty? Your best bumper-to-bumper warranties would be with the Hyundai Kia Motor Group, and then all the luxury cars are going to give you the longest warranties there. Very similar overall. Let's see here. What are the competitors of the Model 3? That is an interesting question. It depends on how you look at the Model 3, and this is something that I've said before. So the Model 3 is a compact luxury car. When you look at the overall size of it, the footprint, the way that it was designed, the performance, handling, interior space, trunk space, etc., the Model 3 is definitely an electric BMW 3 Series, electric Mercedes-Benz C-Class, electric A4, that category right there. So if you're looking at the Model 3 as a luxury car within that window, outside of the electric part, then its direct competitors would be 3 Series, C-Class, A4, Stelvio, or Giulia, etc. In that category right there. Volvo S60, Infiniti Q50, and the rest are mixing up in my head here, IS350, etc. If, however, you are only looking at EVs, then things get trickier, because the Model 3, the body, the suspension, the dynamics of the vehicle, all of that was designed really as an electric alternative to a BMW 3 Series, that Mercedes. And that's logically why the Model 3 has stolen so many sales from the BMW 3 Series. When you look at the sales charts, 3 Series sales have gone down considerably. Model 3 sales have gone up. A lot of those conquest sales have come from the BMW 3 Series, very logically. But if you're looking at an electric vehicle, the only other ones in that price range are going to be sideways competitors. A Jaguar I-Pace, the Audi e-tron, they're crossovers, not the same thing. Maybe you could say the base model of Model 3 versus a Hyundai Kona, or a Kia Niro EV, or a Nissan Leaf. Not the same thing either, though, because those are mainstream brands. It's a very different brand experience, very different kind of car. Those are front-wheel drive. The Model 3 is rear-wheel drive, like a BMW 3 Series. So that's tricky. I mean, if you want electrification and you are shopping in the luxury segment, then your choices really are a Model 3 or a Model 3. And if you want to expand that out to a crossover kind of vehicle versus a sedan, then Model 3 versus I-Pace versus e-tron. We talk about the Model 3 in the I-Pace video. We'll talk about the Model 3 in an e-tron video whenever we have one. And we will be talking about the Model 3 in a Model 3 video if our Model 3 ever shows up. But the big win for Tesla in this category is efficiency. And this is something that I've really said before. Tesla does not excel when it comes to fit and finish, when it comes to paint quality, those sorts of things. Not necessarily customer experience either, although that's hit and miss with any car manufacturer because dealers are involved. And overall feature set and luxury touches, they may fall behind some of the luxury competition as well, but efficiency is really the key here. So the I-Pace and the e-tron are 30% less efficient than the least efficient Tesla currently available. And just to reiterate that, 30% less efficient than a Model X all-wheel drive with the biggest battery pack. And the Model X has a third row, and it's significantly heavier than an I-Pace. No one's really sure what the reason is here. Why is the I-Pace, why is the e-tron so inefficient? We don't have a good answer. But we do know that not only are they less efficient, they also have slower onboard chargers. So you're going to pay more to drive, and most importantly, the most important interaction here is when you go home and you plug it into an outlet, you're going to gain range significantly faster in the Model 3, because not only is it 30% more efficient, so the 1 kilowatt hour that you're putting in will take you 30% further or 40% further, but also the charger is 20 to 30% faster. So you're gaining range 40 to 50 to 60% faster than those alternatives. That's a really important consideration. The supercharging network is not as big of a deal to me personally. The big innovation with supercharging is not necessarily the speed, because there are other charging network standards out there that will go faster or almost as fast at the moment and then has a future projecting out there in a good way. It's the convenience and the location for the supercharger network that's the thing. And it's designed for interstate travel. So the supercharger stations are designed to get you from San Francisco to Los Angeles to San Diego, or San Francisco to New York in a relatively consistent and logical way. They're spaced out that manner. Other supercharger networks, other supercharging networks, I guess if you could call them that, or DC fast charge networks, they're not laid out in that with that same overarching master plan. Someone at Tesla has a master plan and says, we will spread this network across the US. That results in supercharger network stations in Nebraska, Montana, the Dakotas, Idaho, the middle of nowhere, California, the middle of nowhere, Texas, where you need the charging stations to facilitate that travel, but there aren't many local users. On the other hand, the DC fast charge networks that the iPace and e-tron and Kona and everybody else can use, they're collected very heavily in metro areas. So they're easier and more convenient to find. For instance, from my location here, where I am in my office, it's much easier to find a combined charging station that you can charge a Kona in. Free ports, location, etc. They're everywhere. They're splattered out on the map, but they're not in these logical locations that facilitates travel that way. So moving along, hopefully I haven't bored anybody on that one. Should I get the Ram 1500? Is it the best pickup truck? Personally, I would say the Ram 1500 is the best one for me at the moment, although there are definitely things that I like about the Ford F-150 and the Silverado as well. And that sounds like an awfully conflicted answer or the easiest answer to take. But the reality is that the truck market, the pickup truck market in America is intensely competitive. We're talking about millions of sales a year. The Ram pickup truck outsells almost every vehicle in the United States, and it's the smallest selling one. The Ram 1500 pickup truck outsells all of BMW, let's put it that way, in the United States. So it's intensely competitive, and everybody is working their hardest to make that best option out there, and that's why I think it's difficult to choose. So the Ram 1500 really excels when it comes to the overall ride and interior refinement in the top-end trims. And then sideways, Ram also has very inexpensive models as well. So if you're looking for a really, really base truck and you don't want any options, don't want any gadgets, Ram has one of those for you. But oddly, if you want the polar opposite, where you want all the luxury trimmings, then that's definitely an option for you. In the middle is where the Ram has more of a problem competing, and that's where you might say some of these other options are a little bit better. So for instance, the F-150 really excels when it comes to fuel economy and payload ability. The Chevy Silverado definitely excels when it comes to the actual bed of the truck, its overall size, its overall width. It also has some really great trailering functions. I love the Chevy app on your phone that lets you connect a trailer by yourself. That's something that I sometimes will skip if I'm on my own and I'm connecting a trailer. Are the lights connected properly? You know, maybe they're probably right, but I didn't have the opportunity to check because I'm by myself, and you can do that by yourself with the Chevy truck. If I could create the perfect truck, I would say it would be the 10-speed automatic transmission from Ford and from Chevy. It would be the interior from the Ram pickup truck for sure, the infotainment system from the Ram trucks as well, because I love the way their software works. But then probably engines from the General Motors brand heading that event. So if you're shopping for a truck on an engine, I would say General Motors. If you're shopping for fuel economy, Ford. If you're shopping for interiors, Ram. So hopefully that helps you there. Tax phase is out April 1st for the Bolt EV. So yeah, so if you want a Bolt EV, hurry because you have 1 day left. Let's see here. Thanks for answering my question about Tesla. You're welcome there. Hopefully that helped you. And now I should probably move on to our own Tesla order drama. So we did order that Tesla base model about 4 weeks ago. It has not shown up yet. We got notification from Tesla that our order was scheduled for delivery today and at 2 o'clock, which was 2 hours ago, and we still don't have a Tesla. So not sure what's going on there. There are a lot of rumors. It appears, by all accounts, that there's some issues around the discount interior, or what they're calling the standard interior, but we don't really have a good answer for that because it doesn't appear that anybody has received their base Model S yet, or our Model 3 yet, sorry. So who knows exactly how that's going to go. Did you miss the hydrogen talk? Just got a Nexo? No, you didn't. We talked a little bit about it, but we could talk a little bit about that before we go here. And then I will actually say this will probably be our last random thought before we close out for the day. So be sure and stay tuned next week for more thoughts here. Hydrogen has some interesting pros and cons. I love the Nexo. I love the vehicle itself. And then the hydrogen part is an interesting add-on, I guess, in a way. So I would be interested in the Nexo if it was a regular hybrid car. If Hyundai took a Nexo, jammed a plug-in hybrid system in it, I would probably get one too. I like the packaging overall, the size, etc., the comfort level. But I also like the thought of hydrogen for long-distance travel, and this would be the big thing here. So, and the key thing to understand with hydrogen technology, hydrogen is never going to be as efficient as a battery electric vehicle for energy storage. Efficiency is just not the goal with hydrogen. So when you take water and you use electrolysis to break the hydrogen and the oxygen apart, the bond between hydrogen and oxygen from a chemical thin physics standpoint is extremely strong. And it's a difficult one to break. It takes a lot of energy. And so when you break them apart and then recombine them, you're never going to get as much energy out of the recombination as it took to break them apart in the first place. And the delta at the moment is about 25% with modern fuel cell technology. Even if modern fuel cells doubled their efficiency, it would still be significantly less efficient to get hydrogen and use hydrogen in this way. Now, there are other methods of getting hydrogen. We can steam reform natural gas, and you can get hydrogen that way. Then you're left with the other byproducts of natural gas. And what do you do with them? You could burn them in your stove, your other natural gas appliances, etc. Still technically not a renewable resource, but uses less energy. You can also get hydrogen as a byproduct from petrochemical refining. And right now, a lot of hydrogen for industrial uses comes that way. You're breaking hydrocarbon chains, and hydrogen just is given off in this process. So you collect it, and then you can use it. Now, is this green? Not necessarily, but it's also a waste product. So is it bad? Is it good? I don't know if we have a direct answer for that just yet. But it is a method of gathering hydrogen. We can also do it via some biomethods. There's some algae out there that have been developed that will give off hydrogen when the atmosphere is just right for the algae. That does appear to be a good way of doing it because you're converting solar energy into hydrogen in a method that appears to be more efficient than solar and then electrolysis. So those are valid concerns around hydrogen. The more practical concern with hydrogen, however, is that it allows relatively lightweight long-range vehicles. And that's the practical rationale behind the Nexo. So a Nexo will go 354 to 380 miles on a full tank of hydrogen. When that mileage is complete, you stop at a hydrogen station. 5 minutes later, the tanks are completely full. You can go another 380 miles. This is significantly faster than anything you can do with a battery electric vehicle at the moment. The fastest charging station that we have now would be the Model 3's latest supercharger station. That will get you about 100 miles in around 10 minutes or so, but the rest of the fill will take a lot longer because batteries don't charge so directly. So if we take a look at the charging rates on batteries, pardon if I'm marking things here, it would be sort of a curve like this. And that's a little bit exaggerated there. But basically at 0 here, we can't charge very quickly. And this is actually bad scale, but maybe 5% is here. So 5% battery charge. By 0 to 5, charging starts ramping up. And then we can really stuff a lot of electrons in the battery here in this range. But by the time the batteries hit about 50% or so, possibly, the charge rate is going to have to start slowing. And then as we hit down here all the way towards 100%, the charge rate on a DC fast charger may actually be as slow as a 110 volt charge cable, between 98 and 100%, for instance, to get that absolutely full fill. You can think of this as sort of trying to sort like golf balls in a box. You can fill a lot of golf balls real fast at the beginning, but to pack those last few golf balls in, it takes a while. And that's sort of what's going on inside a battery. With a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, it just fills much more rapidly. The other thing is that the energy density is much, much higher in a hydrogen vehicle like that. So the actual fuel stored on board the Nexo is almost double the potential energy that we see in the entire Tesla Model X battery pack, the biggest one available. And it's still more energy than we see even in the Rivian's battery pack, which is absolutely huge and very, very heavy. The Nexo weighs at its most 4,100 pounds, which is barely heavier than a Santa Fe with the 2-liter turbo engine. It's about 50 pounds or so. So the two curb weights are very, very close together. And to double the hydrogen capacity inside the Nexo would not have a substantial increase in the overall weight. Doubling the hydrogen capacity might add 150, 200 pounds maybe-ish. Doubling the range capacity of a modern electric vehicle would more than double the weight of the battery. And the battery in a Model S, Model 3, Model X, they're well over 1,000 pounds. So we're talking about a significant amount of curb weight. So that's the big rationale behind hydrogen systems. Now that said, battery electric vehicles make a lot more sense if you're just commuting around town. If your commute's very short and you can plug in at home, plug in at work, then that's where you're going to want to do that sort of thing there. But if you're doing longer travel or you want to be able to commute longer distances, then hydrogen vehicles would be more efficient. Let's see here. So some people are commenting about hydrogen on the Hindenburg. If you do more research on the Hindenburg, you'll notice that actually hydrogen was not the big reason that that burst into a big ball of flames. So they also basically used paint on the Hindenburg that was extraordinarily flammable, and that was really not helping out either. All independent tests by NHTSA, by the IHS, and all the other agencies out there that have been doing industrial standardized testing on the vehicles, they don't indicate that hydrogen is any more or less safe than a gasoline vehicle. The failure modes are just different, but actual general safety terms does not appear to be vastly different. Anyway, so with all of that out of the way, I believe we are going to just quit our live show here. So I will talk to you all next week. Be sure and set your clocks because hopefully we will be on time and probably around this exact same time of day. So with all that out of the way, I will let you all go if I can find the button.